Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, from a Hamas terror tunnel to a seat at the UN Security Council, Eli Sharabi recounts his hellish ordeal in captivity. Plus, a commitment to partnership. Regent University hosts UN Ambassador Danny Danon at the Israel Institute. And Ambassador Sam Brownback describes the plight of religious minorities in Syria, while Michelle Bachmann says we're living in a hinge of history moment. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. One Israeli hostage has made a journey from a Hamas terror tunnel deep underneath Gaza to a seat at the United Nations Security Council. Eli Sharabi testified to the world what it was like as a Hamas hostage for nearly 500 days. Here's his testimony and a review of the latest developments in the region.
My name is Eli Sharabi. I'm 53 years old. I've come back from hell. I've returned to tell my story.
Eli Sharabi, freed after 491 days in captivity, addressed the UN Security Council on Thursday.
I cannot begin to describe the agony. It was hell. I was fed a piece of pita a day, maybe a sip of tea. Hunger consumed everything. They beat me, they broke my ribs, I didn't care. I just wanted a piece of bread.
He also testified Hamas stole the humanitarian aid sent into Gaza.
I saw Hamas terrorists carrying boxes with the UN and UNRWA emblems on them into the tunnel. Dozens and dozens of boxes, paid by your government. They would eat many meals a day from the UN aid in front of us, and we never received any of it. When you speak of humanitarian aid, remember this. Hamas eats like kings, while hostages starve.
Sharabi, who dreamed of rebuilding his life with his wife and two daughters, learned that Hamas murdered them on October 7th. Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon chastised the UN for ignoring Hamas's crimes against the captives.
For 530 days, you have erased the hostages. You have spoken about Gaza without mentioning the crimes of Hamas. You have debated humanitarian assistance without acknowledging the humanitarian crimes Hamas is deliberately inflicting on the hostages. You have had the audacity to talk about a ceasefire without demanding that those held in Hamas's terror tunnels be freed.
On the ground in Gaza, the IDF expanded its military operation. The White House continues its support for Israel.
This situation, let's not forget, is completely the fault of Hamas when they launched that brutal attack on Israel on October 7th. And the president has made it very clear that he wants all of those hostages to come home, and he fully supports Israel and the IDF and the actions that they've taken in recent days.
As the Houthis fired another ballistic missile towards Israel Thursday, the U.S. continues its air campaign to stop the Iranian-backed group from terrorizing Israel and the region. Meanwhile, in an unprecedented move, Israel's cabinet voted unanimously to fire the head of the country's domestic intelligence agency. Ronen Bar is the head of the Shin Bet, the equivalent of America's FBI. Netanyahu accused Bar of failing to warn the government in time about October 7th. As Iranians celebrated the Persian New Year of Nowruz, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke directly to the Iranian people.
May this be a year of servat, prosperity. Prosperity when you, the people of Iran, can finally enjoy Iran's rich natural resources, those resources that have been so long denied to you by an oppressive regime. A year of azadi, freedom, real freedom, freedom from oppression, freedom from want, freedom to live, freedom to choose. Chag Nowruz Sameach, happy Nowruz to all of you.
IDF Sergeant Major Chaim Mailspin told CBN's Raj Nir Hamas and other terror groups were using the ceasefire to prepare for another invasion of Israel.
Our intelligence gave a very strong indication that during this regrouping time, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Jabhat al-Nusra, etc., wanted to actually do another invasion. Right now, during the ceasefire, this is what our intelligence sources said, use the little time they had during the ceasefire to do another invasion.
The IDF is pleading with civilians to get out of the combat zones.
Yesterday, the Israeli army dropped leaflets asking us to evacuate the area in Beit Hanun.
Israel's defense minister warns that it's going to get worse if the hostages are not freed and Hamas removed from power.
Unless all the Israeli hostages are released and Hamas is expelled from Gaza, Israel will act with forces never before seen. Take the U.S. President's advice, return the hostages and expel Hamas, and other options will be presented to you, including relocating to other places in the world for those who wish. The alternative is utter destruction and devastation.
In Washington, the Trump administration says the new fighting could end right away if Hamas would accept the U.S. proposal to extend the ceasefire begun in January. An administration spokesperson warned the opportunity is still there, but it's closing fast. The State Department says what President Trump wants most is a permanent and real peace between the Israelis and Palestinians. President Trump called on Iran to stop arming the Houthi rebels in Yemen, promising to step up attacks until they are completely annihilated. As to Iran's nuclear program, Trump has reportedly given the regime in Tehran 2 months to negotiate a deal making sure they don't develop nuclear weapons. The president indicated if this can't be done peacefully, it will have to be done militarily. Iran responded with its own threat.
We will firmly respond to any aggression against our territorial integrity, national security, or interests with full force. There is no question about that.
Up next, a Regent University symposium calling a new generation to support Israel and announcing new educational initiatives. You saw UN Ambassador Danny Danon there at the Security Council earlier in the week. He was at CBN and Regent University, where they welcomed him to the campus to discuss a wide range of issues facing Israel. Also on the agenda, a major announcement about several partnerships and initiatives. The efforts are designed to help Regent students and other Americans to appreciate and support Israel for generations to come. Gary Lane has more.
At the Herzliya Conference in 2003, Pat Robertson reiterated God's love and support and the support of evangelical Christians for the state of Israel. Here 22 years later, that love was demonstrated at Regent University.
A symposium hosted by the Israel Institute at the Robertson School of Government featured Israeli Ambassador to the United Nations Danny Danon with Regent Chancellor Gordon Robertson and School of Government Dean Michelle Bachmann. The discussion began with a question about Israel's recent attacks on Gaza, ending the ceasefire. Danon suggested more attacks are coming unless Hamas releases the remaining hostages.
We still have hostages in Gaza, 59 hostages. We will do whatever is necessary to bring them back home. And I hope that they will get, the message, and we will be able to continue to see hostages coming back.
Another question raised the issue of whether Israel supports a one-state or two-state solution for the Palestinians after the war in Gaza ends. Ambassador Danon said since October 7th, more Israelis oppose a separate Palestinian state.
We have to admit that the region where we live, I don't think it will change. Because I don't think that you will see a major change among our neighbors in the indoctrination of the next generation.
Danon believes the younger generation is influenced by agents of anti-Semitic ideology, not only in Gaza, but also on American college campuses.
So they are not coming with the machine guns and with boats to the shores of the United States, but they have ways to infiltrate.
And I think that's happening now. We're looking at a deportation of a student from Columbia University, and also the funding that's come from Qatar. I think it's over $5 billion has gone to various campuses across the United States.
Robertson also announced several initiatives and partnerships between Regent, CBN, and the Jewish state. Israel's Hebrew University, in partnership with Regent's Israel Institute and CBN Israel, is offering 3 Regent students fully paid scholarships beginning in the fall of 2025. CBN Israel is also opening a resilience center to help Israelis traumatized by war and the October 7th massacre. It's also helping rebuild Kibbutz Narim, one of the communities devastated by the October 7th attack. Adele Raymer is a Narim resident.
Today, I truly know that the Christian community around the world has our backs. And that just gives us so much inspiration and strength.
CBN Israel and Regent University, standing with Israel today and for generations to come. Gary Lane, CBN News.
At the recent National Religious Broadcasters Convention, a group of influential Christian leaders recently made a declaration reaffirming the Jewish people's claim to Judea and Samaria, often referred to as the West Bank. Here's more on what this means for Israel and why it's gaining support. It served as a defining moment at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. American Christian leaders documenting their support for Israel's biblical claim to the heart of ancient Israel. The resolution reads in part, "We reaffirm the Jewish people's inalienable right to the biblical heartland of Israel and reject all efforts, both from the United States and the international community, to pressure the Jewish people to relinquish their ancestral homeland in Judea and Samaria."
Not just the Old Testament, but even Jesus and the disciples, the New Testament scriptures that took place in Judea and Samaria. And because of this, we are showing the deep roots, the deep attachment that the Jewish people have to Judea and Samaria.
Josh Reinstein, president of the Israel Allies Foundation, hosted the event.
Christians from across America, major leaders, we're talking about thousands of pastors under the American Christian Leadership for Israel. They wanted to be very clear that Bible-believing Christians in America want that statement to be a positive statement for Judea and Samaria because they believe that that's what God wants to happen.
David Parsons of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, emphasized the legal and historical basis behind the Jewish claims.
People will call it, well, you're annexing, you're sort of, a hostile takeover. You cannot annex something that you already own. And the international community, back in the 20s and all with the League of Nations, they already recognized Israel had a pre-existing. It wasn't something that they were creating a new right for Israel. All they did was recognize Israel's pre-existing rights and claims the Jewish people to their homeland. The League of Nations mandate called for close Jewish settlement on the land, and that included Judea and Samaria.
ACLI also sent the resolution to President Trump as he prepares to make a decision on the region.
It's an opportunity, the timing with him there, to give Israel space and room to work its way out of this war with freedom to make its decisions and assess what it needs to do next.
Reinstein says the movement advocating this sovereignty is growing.
So this is happening as an independent activity across America, but something big is happening. And I think what's important is that the president sees this.
I'm overwhelmed. I started talking to Christians 30 years ago about Judea and Samaria at a time when virtually no one else was doing that. And I kept saying, Judea and Samaria, this is biblical Israel, help us. And, we would have support. But what I'm seeing today is just exponentially more than I ever dreamed. And people today at the top levels of Christian leadership and going all the way to the White House, having this kind of support for applying sovereignty in Judea and Samaria, it's a dream come true.
This declaration by American Christian leaders is significant. It strengthens the bond between Israel and the Christian world and reminds people that the history here is not just political, it's biblical. Coming up, Ambassador Sam Brownback, a global statesman, discusses the plight of religious minorities in Syria and the Middle East. Ambassador Sam Brownback formerly served as Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom under the Trump administration. Since then, he continues to champion religious liberty with coalitions around the world. He joins us now to discuss how religious freedom is at risk under the new Syrian regime. Ambassador Brownback, thanks for joining us. There's been so horrific pictures and videos coming out of Syria. What do you know about the massacres there under this new Syrian regime?
I know there's continued killing, and unfortunately, this is a pattern that we've seen in the Middle East. Whenever you get an old dictator thrown off, and the Assad regime had been there for 50 years, what it unleashes are these destructive forces that often catch Christians and drive Christians out of the country or kill them. And we're seeing that starting to play out increasingly in Syria. We've got to be aggressive, I think, ourselves and support the religious minorities in particular in that country to make sure they're not forced out and they can stay on their own land and not get killed and driven out.
Yeah. Over the last decades, what would you say about the Christian community in particular throughout the Middle East?
It's shrunk dramatically. It was pretty substantial in size in Iraq while Saddam Hussein was in power. And I'm no fan of Saddam Hussein, but he kept kind of a lid on this ethnic violence, this religious violence that was taking place, and has driven that Christian population to 1/10 of the size that it was. And you're seeing that in most of the places outside of Egypt. Egypt has a substantial Christian population, the Coptic faith that's still there. We're getting better, I think, about pushing back and drawing attention to this, but Syria is this key case that's right in front of us right now, and we need to be firm about saying you can't drive these Christians out, you can't kill them if you're going to work with us.
Yeah. Is there any leverage that the White House has or the U.S. government on the new regime?
Well, we do. They need us, and they need our legitimacy, and they need our work. And we work in certain areas of Syria over other areas because it's been balkanized over the fighting that's taken place over this last decade. And we can leverage that. But again, Christian, we've got to be very clear that we see these religious minorities as a key measure of whether you can maintain a country or not. And if you can't do this, your country may get carved up. If you don't protect these religious minorities, and in our case, in particular, the Christian minorities. Now, it seems like the Alawites are the real primary target, but a number of people have been warning about Christians being attacked. They're being attacked. And we've got to stand up to protect these religious minority communities.
Yeah, what would you say about the northeast Syria, where that really has been a sort of a bastion of freedom and democracy in the last 15 years or so?
It has been. It's been a beautiful example of what Syria can be. I mean, this is not impossible for them to do. They've got to keep the Islamist and the militant Islamist out of running that area of the country, and where you particularly got a stable part that's been able to protect its religious minority. Like, for instance, the Kurdish region in Iraq is an area that the religious minorities, particularly the Christians, flee to and have more stabilized there in that area because they're protected there. They're not attacked there. They're allowed to live an honest, peaceful life. And that's what they've got to do in Syria if they hope to maintain that country.
Yeah, and I know they just signed an agreement with the new regime. Is there any concern that northeast Syria could be more influenced by the regime than northeast Syria influencing the regime?
Oh, certainly. I mean, the regime has a lot of leverage, but we've got some leverage. And the northeast Syrians have some leverage. But unfortunately, in that region, I mean, guns talk, and the regime is the one that has guns, and it's got a lot of radical elements. Their roots are all radical that they come from. And they get supplied by a number of radicals from outside the regime. And the Turks have not been the friend of Christians in the Middle East by any means here in recent years, for sure. They're having a big influence in the region. I think one of the groups we need to target and push on as much as anything is Turkey. They're the ones that could really bring some leverage to bear, and they need to hear. And they've heard from us before, and they know when we're serious about something, they'll straighten up and they'll start listening to us more.
Yeah. Well, Ambassador Bromberg, thanks so much for your insight to what's happening here in Syria and the region.
Thank you, Chris.
Still ahead, analysis from Michelle Bachmann on the lightning-fast changes coming with alliances in the Middle East and the hinge of history moment she says we're living in. Michelle Bachmann is a former congresswoman and now dean of the Robertson School of Government at Regent University. What many people don't know about her is that ever since working on a kibbutz as an 18-year-old, she's had a deep investment in Israel. She spoke with us recently about the swift changes happening with Israel's relationship with its Middle Eastern neighbors and the U.S. Michelle Bachmann, great to be with you once again, sometimes in Jerusalem, sometimes here in the U.S. Tell us where we are right now in terms of a new administration, a new relationship with Israel. What do you see going on?
Well, obviously, it's a great time right now, but what I see is that the hinge of history is turning right now regarding Israel and their relationship with the United States, but also their relationship with other countries, including nations that have been their enemies. And so the new story that's coming out is that there may be an arrangement with Saudi Arabia and the United States and the countries that were formerly influenced most heavily by the Shia nation of Iran, and they've been financed and the weapons have been coming in from Iran, that all may turn on its head. Now think of this. So you'd have these nations who willingly gave themselves over to be used by the Iranian Ayatollahs. It looks like now they might be switching allegiances and they might be willing to go Sunni because it looks like billions of dollars may come in from the Saudi Arabia, and instead of Shia allegiance, a Sunni allegiance. Well, what does that mean? Those are two different strains of Islam. And so Shia Islam is affiliated with Iran, and they only have one goal in mind, and that is to kill every Jew that there is and annihilate Israel. But they also want to bring death to the United States. So that's quite a goal that Iran has had. So to defeat that goal would be profound. I believe that we're there right now. I believe that we're there where the hinge of history is turning. Under the Biden administration, sadly, it looked like Iran was on its way to achieve its goal. Now, under the Trump administration, it looks like the facts on the ground are changing in such a way that the Ayatollahs in Iran won't be achieving their goal anytime soon. And the latest reports say that the Ayatollahs are scared to death that Israel and the United States are going to take out their nuclear program. Let's hope and pray that nuclear program is ended. And let's hope and pray that the Ayatollahs are removed out of leadership in Iran, because actually, the Persians who live in Iran are wonderful people for the most part. They're great people. My next door neighbor are Persians who fled Iran when the Ayatollahs came in. So this is something to continue to pray for. I want to encourage all of the viewers to pray right now for the political decisions that are being made. Foreign policy decisions affect decades into the future. So this is when believers need to pray. Our prayers were heard for many of us last fall, but now we need to lean in even more. That's been my sense since the inauguration. We need to lean in even more in prayer, first of all, for safety and security for the president, the vice president, the administrative team, but we need to be praying for Israel because this is a turning point. I firmly believe that we're living in a supernatural time when there's a window of blessing over Israel right now that's unusual, it's open, and I think this is that hinge of history that's turning, that Israel could come to a point where it actually is living securely in peace among its neighbors. So we need to pray into that time. And so it's Isaiah 40. It's the time for the believer to comfort ye my people. And so Christians were a little bit late to the dance, in my opinion, after October 7th, 2023. Now they've woke up. Now they want to bless. And so the greatest way we can bless is to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, but then also urge President Trump. And I'm really encouraged because President Trump sat behind his desk. He had that little black marker pen, and he said, "See the cap of this pen? That's Israel. Now look at my entire surface of the Resolute desk. That's the Middle East." He said, "I think it'd be a good idea if Israel was bigger." And I thought, wow, I agree with him. So and then after that, of course, he called for the expulsion of the supporters of Hamas out of Gaza. And so he may be extending sovereignty over Judea, Samaria. That would make Israel bigger, and then also Gaza, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. And please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem, for the protection of IDF soldiers and all those caught in harm's way, and for the safe return of all the hostages. I'm Chris Mitchell. For all of us here in the Jerusalem Bureau, we'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.